I'm going to give a talk I've never given before, and we're going to see how that goes. I normally talk about the future of work, the future of learning, jobs that don't exist yet, and then something started happening. The last 3 or 4 talks I've given, I give 3 to 5 a month. People came up to me and they started crying. It was a little weird. But I realized that humans are under a tremendous amount of stress. And I don't think we're acknowledging it. And I think it speaks to the contraction before expansion that Tara just spoke about. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity being at the CUSP conference to put a design challenge out to you guys. So I wanted to start off by saying, okay, well, what is design? And I looked for the most expansive definition that could be inclusive. So I picked this one from Herbert Simon, which was mirrored a little bit one that Dave and I had a conversation about, which is basically design is to devise a course of action to take existing solutions into preferred ones. So our existing situation is we're trapped between the 3rd and the 4th Industrial Revolution. So in order to engage in this discussion, I think it's important to delineate between story and narrative. So normally I get up and I tell a story about how the world's changing. But in this particular talk, I'm going to engage with you guys in narrative. And the difference between story and narrative, according to John Hagel, who I like to learn from Deloitte, he says is that a story is resolved. It has a theme, it has a point. You can listen to the story, reflect on it, think about what it means to your own life. Narrative is unresolved. It needs you to complete the action. So I need you guys to help me complete this action. So start with the design process. This is pretty much a modified version of the one that the UK Design Council uses. First part of it's problem finding and framing. Second part of it's problem solving and solution selecting. We're way here on what I want to talk to you about, and I want to start with some questions. So what is this identity crisis? I think it's really 3 questions that we're stuck with. We're stuck with them in terms of how we answer them to each other, but more importantly, we're stuck with them in terms of how we generate our own internal monologues. So the first one is, who are you? Second one is, what do you do for a living, which is the first question everybody seems to ask each other. And then, where are you from? 3 very basic, simple questions that I think are changing right now. And something's happening at the individual level, and I think this is why humans are under stress. So we're in the age of accelerations. I have the good fortune to have crossed paths with New York Times' Thomas Friedman about 4 or 5 years ago, and we speak regularly. He says that we're going through 3 climate changes at once: the climate of technology, the climate of the climate, and the climate of the market. So the climate of technology is Moore's Law. Technology is coming, robots are coming to get your jobs, all that stuff you've heard about. Climate change is we've got 12 years to save the planet. And the market is where we've gone from a connected to interconnected to interdependent society where changes happening on other sides of the world affect us immediately. These 3 climate changes that he describes are changes in the macro context in which we live. What does that mean to the individual? So if we look at the velocity of change, humans have the ability to adapt to linear change. Linear change is 1, 2, 3, 4 steps that are equally distant apart. What we're going through is exponential change, where every step is double the prior step. And where we are in the process is we're starting to be at that point where between 2 becomes 4 or 4 becomes 8. And that's the stress we're starting to feel. And I think it's happening across the dimensions he describes, but I think it's happening to individuals a little differently. So this is a framework that I use sometimes when I give my talks. And I realized that it was wrong, so I'm going to present it to you, but I realized there's some aspects of it that are incomplete. So we're living longer at a time that the change rate is happening faster. So we've made huge leaps in longevity. Back in 1750, you'd live to 37 years old. Now, if you're born today, there's a good chance you'll live to 100. At the same time, we're going through this massive wave of technology-driven change. And back in 1750, you had 2.5 generations to absorb the change of something like the steam engine. And now you're going to have to absorb 4 or 5 different paradigm shifts within a single generation. And the reason I think this chart is wrong or incomplete on its own, is it really is just talking about the technology-driven change. And that's the stuff we make, the tools. They're coming at us faster. We're being threatened by our own creations. But along the way, I noticed that something else was going on. We're going through a massive cultural change. And so I started making a list, and this is a short list of some of it, and then I'll unpack it. So we're going from race, we're going from a white majority, and I'm largely talking about the US here, to soon will be a white minority, at least in our lifetime. We're going from Christianity being the sort of dominant war on Christmas kind of conversations to more of the population being unaffiliated or a plurality of religions. From a regional standpoint, we're going from, although we've been predominantly living in cities, we have more of a rural mindset, to overwhelmingly living in urban cities. And we're going from about a third Republican, Democrat, and independent to being highly polarized on either side in tribes with most folks in the middle. We have like 43% independent right now. And then ages, we've been a sort of a youthful society, at least that's how advertisers portray us. The 18 to 44, the 18 to 54 demographic is the one you wanted to go after. Soon we're going to have more old people than we have young people in an aging society because we're having fewer children and people are living longer. And then family, which was mom, dad, and 2.5 kids, is now going to be a plurality of types, and there's an actual middle child extinction going on because now we're having fewer than 2 kids. Gender identity, that was, it's in the news right now because someone's trying to change it, but it was fixed and binary when I was born. It's now much more gender fluid for a lot of people. Consent. So it was sort of silently permissible to sexually harass someone. Now we've got Me Too and Time's Up. Occupation, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but it used to be your fixed employee identity. The first thing you say to someone is what you do or what company you work for. I think we're moving towards a portfolio of self-expression, but we're not giving the people the tools to talk about it. And then leadership, I stand in front of you today not because of any company I worked at, not because of any degree I have or any position I held, but I've been giving these talks now for a couple of years. It's gotten a lot of attention with people, and so I'm in front of you as some sort of expert, but I'm not credentialed as an expert in the way that we formally used to credential people. And then finally, we've had a society that was largely white male dominated in terms of the leadership position. We're seeing, and I think we'll see more diverse leaders and more female leaders, or certainly I hope so. So these are some pretty big shifts within a single generation. And if you sort of unpack it and you look at under the who are you bucket, who are you is your cultural identity. It's sort of for many people, it's your context. I can only be who I am if everybody around me looks like me, or shares my values, or eats like me, or prays like me. So right now we have the most connected generations. I say generations because it's the millennials and Gen Z are the 2 most connected generations. They're also the most isolated. When they did a study recently, it's not our elderly people who are feeling lonely and isolated. It's our young people. We need to figure out why. Ruby Rose opened the European Music Awards by saying, "Ladies and gentlemen and everyone in between." It's the first time I'd ever heard anybody say something like that, and that was a real movement in a very quick period of time when you look at it. On the right, you've got a stroller. On your left, you've got a walker. In 2027, we'll have more walkers and strollers. We'll have more people over 65 than under 14 for the first time in history. What does that mean to our advertising industries? In my lifetime, and probably within yours, CEO pay's gone up 1,000%, while worker pay's gone up about 10%. We have the highest levels of income inequality since the 1920s. I hope this is the extraction before expansion moments we're in. So we've got home ownership is down, home equity's down, higher rate costs are up, healthcare costs are up, consumer costs are down, which is good. Social mobility overall is down. So what happened to the American dream? We've had some changes in our power structure. Very quickly in the last, 2 years, the Me Too and the Time's Up movement, 203 leaders have been removed. 50% of them have been replaced by females, which I think is interesting. Black Lives Matter, I don't think they've realized their potential yet, but they've been more organized, been more vocal. We're starting to see them more as a force. We've always been a country of immigrants, but for some reason, this group of immigrants is valued differently than the ones who came over on the Mayflower, and we've somehow made it permissible to put kids in cages. That's an interesting point in our history in terms of our moral values on the world stage. An individual running for office said this, he's not a war hero because he was captured, and then somebody else did this, and there are very different opinions right now on which one of these 2 people is more patriotic. In 2015, Harvard entered its first class that was more atheist than Christian. Just interesting. Fake news is not new, and I'm not sure it would even exist without Hillary Clinton. She seems to be very important fodder for them. But digitization made it a whole lot easier. This was fake. A lot of people fell for it. People in my own family fell for it. Trump did not have his hand on his heart. It was photoshopped. Hillary also was not running a pornography ring out of the State House. But there are a lot of people who'd swear that's true. And what happened today with the pipe bombs is really scary. So what's happening to our politics is we were sort of a third camp, but the median in each party really wasn't that far apart. We could still have conversations with each other. Now it's an us or them. Because look at what's happened. And can you imagine if they did 2018? So if I sort of graph this by picking out the things that I think are big moments, go back to the 60s. So the civil rights movement and the countercultural movement was when we started bringing some of this stuff up to the surface, started addressing structural changes. Then we lost 70s, 80s, and 90s. I think we started to really lose trust in companies, laying people off. People were just costs to contain as opposed to assets to develop. Now we're at a point where we've got marriage equality and gender fluidity. We're having some backlash. We have more women in leadership roles. We have lots of migration within countries as well as immigration. And we're going towards a white minority unaffiliated in religious plurality, and more people are 65 than under 14. This is a big change in the context if I define myself by the people around me, or if that's so important to me. So let's look at what do you do. So it used to be the only thing you did was survive. That was it. It was your goal. You made it to the end of the day. You were good. Then we created this thing called work. That required we needed something called education. And then we created this thing called retirement. So those 3 boxes of life came out of the bucket of survival. And it looked like this: education, career, retire. You went to school in the first third of your life, got on the career ladder, you collected a pension, and by design, you died a year later. You were successful there if they codified and transferred the right skills into you to get you your first job and get you off on that ladder. We still operate like this is true. It's a failed promise. Because now it looks more like this. Life expectancy is not 90, but it will be soon. Education becomes learning to me because learning is lifelong as opposed to an end state of being educated. Career becomes leverage of that learning because there's a relationship between the two of them. And retirement really becomes a reality of longevity, and we have to think differently about it. So it becomes engagements with some overlap, some learning, and the success measures here are learning, agility, adaptability, agency, fueled by purpose. We're not preparing people for this world, but this is the reality. So we ask these ridiculous questions. What do you want to be when you grow up? That is a ridiculous question. This number is probably wrong. Now I've heard it's a third. It doesn't matter. 57% of statistics are made up. A lot of the jobs don't exist yet. And those that do, half the work within them is going to be automated. So why limit somebody's potential by making them imagine a future self and then work towards it? We ask university students to pick a major before they even step on campus. Less than a third of them ever work in the field of their major, and that's looking backwards. Looking forwards, it's probably going to be 3%. And then what do you do? This question I have trouble answering myself. Research suggests that young people today will have 17, 18 different jobs across 5 different industries. So we're calcifying somebody's mindset and identity around an expression of skills and knowledge at a moment in time, and I think that's dangerous. Also, we've had a profound change in the amount of work that is routine versus non-routine. We tend to codify and transfer skills into people for routine work, when really that routine work is soon going to be subsumed by automation and different forms of technology, whereas non-routine work is growing, but we're not teaching people how to do it. We're not teaching people how to adapt to it. So my friend Tom says you've got to decide it's going to happen. Will it be done to you or by you? I think that's a good way of thinking about it. So if we look at this velocity of change on a chart, sort of you started with computers, then you had mobile, then you had Wi-Fi ubiquity in the early stages of automation, and then the fourth industrial revolution where we have a merger of cyber and physical assets. We're just where the lines are starting to come apart on all of these things, I think. So where are you from is the sort of what I consider an origin identity. And, you know, we've come from this period of time where not that long ago, we all lived in the same town. We were born, lived, and died there. Where you were from, what team do you what sports team do you root for? Now we spend more than half of our time and mental energy somewhere other than where we physically are. What's that going to be like instead of being on Facebook, being in Facebook, or being on Snapchat, being in Snapchat, and living in flows of a virtual world? How do we define our origin then? I noticed this recently, the top 10 populations in the world right now, only 2 of them are countries. The rest of them are social media platforms. And here's the thing, it happened in the last 3 or 4 years. Another interesting thing I think has been, it's been a quiet experiment that's going on, but I might jump into it myself, is Estonia has put out there that you can become a virtual resident of their country. They said there's no reason for you to actually come here. We can do it all online. But we want to build the biggest nation of digital nomads. And right now, it was in the last few months, they just crossed more digital nomads than physical nomads being born. So where are you from becomes a really interesting question. So I think it started with, the age of mass migration, physical migration, then the internet connected us so we could be other places in our minds. Now I think we're at a point where when people ask me where I'm from, I don't say United States. I sometimes say Massachusetts, or sometimes I say Boston, but I live part-time in New York, so sometimes I say that too. But we tend to say our city or our state, not our country. We spend 50% of our time online, and we're moving towards this merger of VR and AR, and that may change how we think about where we're from. So why is this happening? Why is this cultural stuff happening so fast? I think there's a few different reasons. So here's a city, this is New York City, and this is where I spend about half my time. In New York, they speak 300 languages, and more than half the residents speak more than one language. Any food you want to get in the world, you can get it in New York City. Any nationality of person you want to find to translate something, you can get it in New York City. Here's, I went looking for the most homogeneous space on Earth. I think this is it, Harrison, Arkansas. They speak 8 languages there, I think because somebody just moved in town. 5% of the residents speak a language other than English, and that's new in the last few years. Do you think the culture change is faster here or here? Interesting thing is we're moving into cities at a rate we've never moved before. So 2/3 of the globe will live in cities in the next 20 years. And in the United States, almost 90% of our population will live on 3.5% of our landmass. Culture's going to move even faster. And then the more and more we digitize different forms of communication and more and more we engage in them, the culture's going to move even faster. So these 3 questions, your cultural identity, your occupational identity, and your origin identity, I think they're all changing, and we're not giving people the tools to figure out what this means for them. Because it isn't so much somebody says, where are you from, and I get confused because I want to answer Facebook. That's not it. But it's what am I telling myself inside? Why am I threatened by people moving into my neighborhood? Why am I threatened by some things changing around me? I think we're digitized, we're disoriented, we're distracted, we're disconnected, and we're despairing. This would be that contraction before the expansion thing. I think some people are despairing because they see a world where things around them changing is really difficult for them. Other people see a world to see a reaction to those things changing around them is breaking their heart because they feel their values in the world are no longer being reflected. So I wanted to say some good news because that was a little bit of a downer. There's lots of reasons to be optimistic. In our lifetimes, this is a human lifetime or less than a human lifetime, we have dramatically reduced global poverty in the world. We've taken 1 billion people out of poverty in the last 40-some-odd years. We've dramatically increased global literacy. Short period of time we've had the internet, we've connected now more than half the globe. We've dramatically reduced infant mortality. There's a whole bunch of dimensions I could put on there, but here's 3 or 4 that are, we can do anything. We have the capability to make massive changes. But I think we need to help individuals think about how they think about themselves. And I think the way we need to start with it, like any good design project, you got to start with empathy. So if you look at these 3 questions, what are we really asking? When you're saying, who are you? And you're asking that of yourself, because I think this is more of an internal monologue. How do you define yourself? And what is it around you that threatens that definition of yourself? And how can we reach out to somebody who is feeling threatened right now and listen to them in a way that doesn't alienate them, but includes them in the vision of the future we want to have? Instead of asking, what do you do? There was a study of studies, that's when they take a bunch of studies and they all conclude that they were all right. It's interesting that they do that. That found that if you lost your job, it would take you twice as long to recover from than if you lost your primary relationship. That to me is profound. That means when you lose your job, someone's taken away your entire identity. And you don't know how to answer that question, what do you do at a cocktail party? And you don't know how to orient yourself in the world. So why don't we turn that into how do you express yourself? Because you don't have to be paid by someone. It's not a bestowed identity. And if we reframed it to how you express yourself, whether it's a person who's transitioning between jobs or a young person trying to figure out how they're going to orient themselves in the world, that connects you to your purpose and your passion, that engages your superpowers, and it implies it's up to you. It gives you a sense of agency and a sense of control. Gives you more resilience. Where are you from is really, I think, as we move forward, how do you connect and create community? This is, again, I think, also an internal monologue, but I think this is the kind of tools we need to teach young people. So those are the 3 questions that I see roiling us today. I don't have the answers. I'm not even sure the right question, but I think they're the right questions, and I welcome anybody who wants to talk about this. So thank you very much.